Bruce Lee entered a private fight scene. 12 seconds later, reality couldn't keep up. They said the room changed before anyone understood why. A challenge had been made in private, among men who believed skill could be measured by force. Witnesses would later agree on only one detail. It ended in 12 seconds. No shouting, no visible strain, just a quiet shift in posture, and a certainty that something they thought was solid had been quietly removed. No one there ever described it as a fight again. The space was small, deliberately so. A single window, high on the wall, let in light that fell in pale rectangles across the floor. No mirrors, no cameras, no applause waiting at the door. Only the men inside and the quiet authority of the room itself. The floorboards creaked underfoot, but not enough to distract. Each step carried weight, measured and deliberate. The walls had absorbed decades of practice, tension, and unspoken rules, the kind that shaped behavior without ever being stated aloud. Everyone present knew how to move, how to strike, how to react. Yet here, in this room, none of that mattered as much as stillness. Bruce Lee entered quietly, not with announcement, not with fanfare. His presence was a gentle distortion in the air, a subtle recalibration that those trained in combat recognized without immediately naming. The challenger, a local martial artist respected for both his skill and his ego, had assumed familiarity would suffice. Experience was currency, confidence a shield. But Bruce did not move to claim space. He observed it, the light, the angles, the distance between men. Every observer felt a pause ripple through the room, though it made no sound. Nothing in the room had changed except for the sense that the ordinary rules might no longer apply. No one spoke. They rarely do in rooms like this when authority is recognized without verbal acknowledgement. The silence was not empty. It was a measure, a weighing of intent and attention. The challenger shifted slightly, testing the room's density, unknowingly testing himself. He moved with a practiced certainty that the room would respond predictably. And in that quiet, Bruce Lee became a question. Not loud, not confrontational, but unmistakable. The room seemed to bend toward observation. Small glances, subtle movements, the brushing of hands against thighs. Each man calibrated his posture, unconsciously, against an invisible standard. In the absence of spectators, the room held only one audience. Those who could perceive reality precisely, and those who could not. The difference, as it would become clear in 12 seconds, was vast. The weight of expectation hung silently, not on Bruce, but on everyone else. It was not a challenge issued in words. It was present in the still air, in the unspoken understanding that the forthcoming demonstration would not be ordinary. And yet, the men waited, not for drama, not for spectacle, but for clarity. The room itself seemed to contract, focusing attention into the space between two figures. One, confident in years of experience, believing that mastery could be displayed through force and repetition. The other, quiet, patient, observing the unseen currents of balance, timing, and intent. Here, in this small, light-sliced room, the first rule of the encounter was already established. The outcome would not be dictated by noise or struggle. It would be dictated by presence. And presence, as those men would soon learn, carries weight heavier than any strike. The challenge itself was quiet. There was no public announcement, no declaration meant to impress an audience beyond the walls. It was conveyed in a glance, a measured stance, a shift of weight. The local fighter, confident in his abilities and the respect he commanded, approached the moment with certainty. He spoke, but not loudly. A simple proposition, to test methods, to measure skill, to see if the man before him truly operated beyond theory. There was no malice in his voice, only the steady cadence of a man accustomed to authority within his own sphere. He assumed he understood the nature of mastery, that skill could be proven in the confrontation of force. Bruce listened. He said almost nothing, His eyes did not wander. His hands rested loosely at his sides, yet every joint was aware, every muscle calibrated. There was no tension, only readiness that had been refined through countless repetitions and reflections. No challenge, no threat, could accelerate the quiet certainty of his observation. Those present watched closely. Some had expected a show, a performance. They instead received a stillness that carried its own authority. The challenger's words filled the space but did not change it. Bruce's presence subtly shifted it. The room, already attuned to restraint, seemed to condense further, as if time itself was drawn toward anticipation without agitation. The invitation was simple in phrasing but significant in consequence. It demanded engagement on a level that transcended physicality. It required recognition of another's understanding, one that was immediate, precise, and invisible until revealed. In response, Bruce did not argue. He did not move forward or step back. He allowed the proposition to exist in the room, fully formed and fully examined. This was a test without spectacle, a question without noise, and in that quiet, the first cracks of inevitability appeared. The challenger's confidence remained intact, though subtle signs of recalibration began to appear. Fingers flexed briefly, shoulders tensed, a foot shifted ever so slightly. These motions were too small to register as hesitation, yet they carried a weight that the room, trained in observation, understood immediately. The witnesses, men who had trained for years in observation and combat, later recalled that nothing had been rushed. There was no dramatic preparation, no flourish of dominance. Only the slow, measured unfolding of presence meeting challenge, a demonstration of authority that required no sound, no display, only acknowledgement. By the time the 12 seconds arrived, the stage had already been set. The challenger, confident yet subtly altered, stepped into a space that had already changed around him. And though he did not yet know it, the method by which this encounter would resolve itself had been silently decided before a strike was thrown. The room had witnessed a shift, one imperceptible in words, yet absolute in consequence. By the time the men in the room had fully registered the challenge, the presence of others, even those silent and still, had become a force of its own. Every observer was positioned at the edge of perception, their attention taut yet restrained. They did not speak. They did not move unnecessarily. Their function was not to intervene but to witness, to measure the subtle shifts in posture, timing, and intent. The challenger, aware of their scrutiny, felt it as a pressure he could not entirely name. It was not judgment in the ordinary sense, nor approval or doubt. It was the room itself becoming a lens, magnifying every hesitation, every minor shift in balance. For a man trained to trust experience, this intensity of observation introduced an imperceptible distortion, enough to influence instinct without conscious recognition. Bruce, by contrast, seemed untouched. He existed in a quiet center, a stillness that did not resist attention but absorbed it. His gaze did not scan the room. It rested on the opponent, measuring distance, timing, and subtle cues. Every twitch of a muscle, every minor adjustment of weight was catalogued instantly and without reaction. To the observers, it looked as if he had slowed the room, not in speed, but in consequence. Every detail became more visible, yet more irrelevant simultaneously. The tension was not loud, nor was it urgent. It was cumulative. It grew through the awareness of subtle misalignments, the quiet accounting of potential mistakes, and the invisible pressure of inevitability. The challenger felt his decisions lengthen in perception, though in reality, no time had changed. The room, watching, felt the unfolding not as suspense, but as certainty manifesting slowly. Witnesses later recalled that even before the first contact, there was a moment that seemed to contain the entire sequence to come. A hand moved slightly, a foot shifted, a breath was drawn differently. These small adjustments, unnoticed by an untrained eye, marked the first acknowledgement that the rules had changed. The challenger's confidence remained, but it had become measured. The weight of watching eyes had begun to calibrate him against something he could not yet name. And in that space between anticipation and action, the first element of psychological mastery emerged. The room itself had become an instrument, an invisible teacher, shaping the challenger's awareness without a word spoken. Bruce's quiet presence did not coerce. It merely existed, and the mind of the opponent adapted reflexively, subtly, irrevocably. No one in the room moved unnecessarily. Yet everything shifted. The observer's eyes, the air, the small increments of distance and posture. They all conspired to compress what was expected into something precise, silent, and final. By the time physical engagement began, the outcome was no longer a question. The tension that had grown in quiet observation would not be released by struggle. It would be released by understanding, immediate, undeniable, and silent. The encounter began without a signal. There was no count, no cue, no ceremonial opening. The challenger moved first, instinctively, guided by training, ego, and expectation. He measured distance, tested timing, prepared to assert control. Bruce Lee did not react immediately. He allowed the first movements to pass through the space, registering them without interference. His body, lean and prepared, did not stiffen, did not anticipate in a conventional sense. Instead, he absorbed the intention behind each motion, the push, the feint, the shift of weight, and waited for the precise instant when the physical became unnecessary. Then it happened. A motion so subtle that no observer could describe it accurately. A step, a pivot, a touch of leverage against the opponent's balance. 12 seconds in total. No flourish, no shouting, no dramatic collision. Just an almost imperceptible application of understanding, executed without excess. The challenger, skilled and confident, found himself disoriented. Not from pain, not from brute force, but from the realization that the rules he relied upon had changed. His timing faltered. His weight shifted awkwardly. Every practiced response seemed delayed, unnecessary, or counterproductive. The witnesses would later recall their struggle to narrate the moment. It was like watching water adjust around a stone, one said. Another described it as a quiet inevitability, too fast to follow, too complete to challenge. The room was silent in the immediate aftermath, not from awe, but from the simple, undeniable clarity of what had just occurred. Bruce did not strike in the way the challenger expected. He did not block or push with visible force. Instead, he moved within the geometry of the opponent's own motions, redirecting energy, neutralizing intention, and asserting control without aggression. Every adjustment was calculated, minimal, decisive, and then it ended. The challenger stood, unchanged in outward appearance, yet fundamentally altered. His hands lowered slowly, his eyes registered comprehension, and a subtle recalibration of presence swept through him. In 12 seconds, a contest that could have escalated into struggle had concluded. The room exhaled collectively, though no breath had been directed. Witnesses knew that what they had seen could not be repeated without understanding the principles underlying it. The outcome was clear. The method remained almost entirely invisible, a quiet paradox that weighed heavily on the minds of everyone present. For those 12 seconds, the room had shifted. It had witnessed authority exercised without noise, mastery displayed without ego, and inevitability manifesting in silence. The event would linger not as spectacle, but as an unspoken benchmark for what could be achieved when understanding surpassed force. When the 12 seconds ended, the room did not erupt. There was no cheering, no acknowledgement of victory. Only the quiet, measured exhalation of men who had been forced to adjust their perception of what mastery looked like. The challenger remained upright. His stance, once confident and rigid, had softened, though not in surrender. It was a recalibration, subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable to those trained in observation. Every muscle had remembered tension it no longer needed. Every reflex had been redirected. The realization of what had occurred sank in slowly, like sediment settling in clear water. Bruce Lee did not gloat. He did not move to dominate or assert superiority. He simply stood, composed, allowing the shift in the room to register naturally. Authority in that space was not demanded. It existed quietly, accepted without confrontation. Those present later described a curious phenomenon. Time seemed to stretch and contract simultaneously. The outcome had been immediate, yet its implications lingered, unfolding in subtle layers. Observers noticed small gestures. The way the challenger's eyes tracked movements differently, how his breathing adjusted, the slight change in posture that reflected a new understanding of balance and timing. No one left the room the same, not because they had been defeated in combat, but because the parameters of expectation had been quietly redefined. The room itself seemed lighter, clearer, more precise. Noise had been removed, and with it, the illusion that skill could always be measured by observable effort. The lesson was not verbalized. There was no discussion of technique or philosophy in the immediate moments. Instead, it manifested in the stillness, a shared, tacit acknowledgement of authority exercised without aggression, of dominance established without spectacle. Later, those who were present recalled that day as if it were a single, quiet pulse. They could not describe every movement, nor did they need to. The understanding of what had occurred resided in posture, in timing, in the invisible currents of control that had been established and maintained. And for the challenger, there was a new humility embedded in motion. Not shame, not defeat, but the recognition that mastery could exist in the unseen, that authority could operate without noise, and that true skill required neither demonstration nor applause. The room returned to normal, outwardly, but inwardly, every man had been changed. The moment was over, but its effects, subtle, quiet, irreversible, would ripple for years in the way they moved, observed, and understood the very nature of skill. Years later, those who had been in that room recalled it in fragments, each memory sharpened by time yet softened by the quiet nature of the event. There were no recordings, no public acclaim, no trophies to mark what had happened. Only recollections, careful, deliberate, and almost reverent, of a demonstration so minimal that it seemed unreal to anyone who had not witnessed it firsthand. The challenger, once confident in his method and approach, never spoke openly of that day. Yet observers noted subtle, permanent changes in his posture, his timing, the economy of his movements. He carried forward a silent acknowledgement of authority that required no confrontation. His presence in subsequent encounters was quieter, more measured, yet infinitely more effective. The lesson of those 12 seconds had been absorbed not in words, but in instinct. For Bruce Lee, the event left no need for celebration. There was no record of dominance, no public validation, only the quiet proof of understanding and refinement. He moved on, as he always had, leaving the space unchanged yet entirely transformed for those who had witnessed it. His presence became a benchmark, a reference point for mastery, economy, and psychological precision. Witnesses described the room itself as having changed. The floors retained no mark of conflict, but the air carried a sense of recalibration. Anyone entering afterward, unaware of what had occurred, would feel an inexplicable shift, a quiet weight that spoke of control, timing, and understanding beyond ordinary measure. Stories spread in whispers, not boastful retellings. They were told to those who could comprehend them, not to impress, but to inform. Over time, the event became legend, not for spectacle, but for the principles it revealed, the power of observation, the inevitability of mastery exercised with restraint, and the enduring impact of quiet authority. Years passed. The men who had witnessed the encounter carried it in their practice, their teaching, their perception of skill. It shaped their movements, their decisions, and the way they measured success. The public may never have known the details, and the world may never have seen the moment unfold. Yet the echo of those 12 seconds persisted, a testament to the idea that true mastery need not be loud, need not be aggressive, and need not seek recognition. The room, once ordinary, had become a silent archive. Its lessons were subtle yet profound. What stayed in the room was not a victory or a performance. It was understanding. It was clarity. It was the quiet proof that the essence of skill lies not in spectacle, but in the deliberate, restrained, and irreversible alignment of knowledge, presence, and action. And in that silence, the legend endured.